The grate had backed out of its seat by a finger's width, and I pressed it home with the heel of my hand, feeling the iron lugs find their slots in the stone. My knuckles were split. Not my knuckles, Roan's. The cold had chapped them raw across the dormitory winter, and the skin pulled when I closed a fist. I worked the grate anyway. Old habit. You finish what your hands have started before you let yourself think about why. Above the iron, the wall lit from within. Dim lines, the color of a banked coal, ran the mortar courses and turned where the corridor turned. They were not painted there. I had learned to stop looking at them, and they stayed, patient, tracing a passage I could walk blind. A chute behind the washstand. A seam under the third floorboard. The lines knew the building better than the masons who set it. I set my thumb against the grate's lower bar and tested the swing. It opened inward. Of course it did. I sat back on my heels and looked down the dormitory's long throat of bunks, and I counted the doors the way I had counted them in 1,200 buildings, and every door I could see opened inward, toward the room, toward the crowd that would press against it when the smoke came. A man who wants people to leave hangs the door to swing out. You learn that in the first week. You learn it again at the 11th inquest, standing over the place where the bodies stacked, because the panic shoved the door shut harder than any lock. These doors were hung by someone who had thought about it. I got up. My legs were a boy's legs, light, untrained, and they took the stairs at the end of the hall before my certifier's eye caught up to them. 6 steps, a landing. 3 steps more, and then the wall, flat, dressed stone, no rail, no exit. The stair simply stopped. I put my palm on the dead face of it. There was no draft behind, no hollow ring, not a sealed door. A stair built to end. You do not build a stair to nowhere by accident. You pay a mason extra to make him understand it. Down in the refectory, the bell went, and warmth came up the stairwell to meet me. Yeast, wood smoke. Somebody had let the ovens run hot, and the smell of new bread filled the cold like water filling a boot. Boys were laughing below, the upperclassmen, the ones who had lived through their own harvest and been told it made them strong. One of them sang something. The lamplight pooled gold on the worn treads. It was a good smell. My stomach answered it before I could stop it. I stood on the dead stair and let the warmth wash up over me, and I made myself read it the way I would read a building. The bread. The lamps placed just so, lighting the way down and leaving the upper galleries dark. The corridor below that narrowed gently by a hand's breadth every 20 feet, so that a man hurrying would feel hurried faster, herded toward the wide, bright room with the long tables and the single arch out. 1 arch for 400 boys. That was the whole design, and the bread was part of it. You make the trap smell like a kitchen. You hang the warm light at the bottom so the body walks down toward comfort, and you let the comfort do the work the locks would do clumsily. I had walked into rooms like this after the fire when the warmth was gone and only the shape of it remained, and the shape always told the same story. This place was built to gather, not to release. I knew that story from the inside now, the other side of it. I had been the one beating my shoulder against a fire door while a steel cabinet held it shut, and the children behind me. I stopped that, hands first. I went back to the grate, reseated it, square and flush, the lugs deep, because a thing done right is a thing done right, whatever it sits inside. The iron was cold and certain under my palms, and that, at least, was honest. Then I noticed what I had been kneeling beside the whole time and not seeing. Below the grate, where the wall met the floor, the mortar was darker than the courses above it, wetter, newer, packed in tight. I scraped a fingernail across it. It came away red-brown and gritty, and it was not clay, and it had been mixed with something the masons upstairs had never touched. Then the cold spoke. Not wind. No window stood near, no gap met my fingers, and still a thread of sound ran along the mortar I'd scraped. Low. 3 voices folded under one another, the way water moves under ice you can't see through. I held still. You listen to a beam the same way before it lets go. The banked coal lines brightened to meet the sound. They had been patient lines, a map I'd taught myself not to stare at. Now they ran. A new course opened along the floor, turned at the dead stair, and went on past it through a wall I would have sworn was solid, threading toward the building's north shoulder. The voices went with them. Or the voices led and the light followed. I could not tell which, and the not telling sat cold in me. I followed. My bare feet found the grit of the corridor, then the smooth dip worn into each sill by 4 centuries of boys. The lamps did not reach here. I went by the glow in the stone, one hand on the courses, counting turns out of habit. Left, a short rise, right, and the 3 voices stayed just ahead. Never words, only the shape of words, the way you hear a name through a wall and know it for a name. They stopped at a door. A low arch, barred. 2 iron straps, a drop bolt seated in a floor socket, hinges set on the outside, my side. I crouched and read it with my fingers. The bar was old iron, the socket newer. Someone had added the bolt after the door was hung. Someone had decided, later, that this room needed keeping shut. The voices crowded against it from within. Close now, all 3, pressed to the seam like cold air finding the one place to escape. I stood with my palm flat on the wood and understood what I was looking at. In every building I ever certified, a corridor like this one, rising, turning toward the outer wall, drawn in my eye in clean lit lines, meant a route, an exit, the way bodies were meant to leave when the smoke came. I had walked thousands of them with a clipboard and a measuring chain, and I had named them on the drawings. Primary egress, secondary, assembly. The lines were drawing me one now. A full plan, complete, every turn correct. The line ended at a barred door with the dead packed behind it. The gift had come over with me, whole. I could still read the escape routes of any building I stood inside, plain as a handrail under the hand. This building had no escape routes. The lines weren't showing me the way out. They were showing me where the way out should have been, and where, instead, they had set a bolt and left the ones who reached it to thin into a draft. The list hung on the dormitory wall, nailed at chest height, 4 columns ruled in lamp black, and already curling at the corner where 1,000 thumbs had worried it. I had come up from the cold corridor to learn what I answered to. A man should know his own name before somebody shouts it across a hall. The lamp here was real, oil-fed, seated in an iron bracket, and by its steady light I read down the right-hand column, where the warden's hand had entered each boy in order of arrival. Aldous, Roan, 3rd floor, West Range, bunk 19. So that was the body. I said it under my breath to fit my mouth to it. Roan Aldous. And the sound meant nothing yet, a name issued to me, not grown into. The ink was good ink. The ruling was square. Whoever kept this register kept it the way I once kept a maintenance log, every entry dated, nothing trusted to memory. I should have walked off then. The bunk number was all I came for. But an eye that reads a building reads everything in it, columns included, and mine ran on down the page out of the plain habit of checking the line beneath the line. 3 down from my own, in the same careful hand. Aldous Liesel. 1st year. Ground hall, East dormitory. I read it twice, to be sure the lamp had not doubled a stroke. Aldous. The same name. A 1st year, one of the new ones. One of the 400 the bread and the low, warm light were laid out to gather, and the single arch was set to keep. A sister. This body had a sister, and I had moved through 3 days of it without once turning toward the fact. Something came up under my ribs before I gave it leave. A warmth, small and quick, like a hand finding another hand in the dark and riding under it some shape of her that was not mine to remember. A gap where a tooth had been. A girl who had said a thing to this boy at the gate and gotten no answer back. The body knew her. I was only catching up. Then I understood where her name sat. An hour before, I had crouched with my palm flat on a bolted door and counted the dead pressed behind it. I had read this whole place along its courses and named it for what it was, built to gather, never to let go. The warm light at the foot of the stair, the one arch out, the bread. Her name was written into the column of the gathered. The fortress that had given me a bunk and an oil lamp and a square-ruled register was the same hand that had entered Liesel Aldous among the first years, among what it fed on. The keeping was good. The keeping was the whole point. I set my finger over her line and held it there, pressed to the cooling ink, as though I could keep the building from reading what it had already written. I lifted my finger from the ink and walked. A building tells the truth to the feet before it tells it to the eye. So I paced the West Range heel to toe, the way I had once walked corridors with a measuring chain, 90 lengths, end to end, one stair down at every turn. The dormitory doors I already knew. Every leaf hung to swing inward, into the room, into the press of whatever stood behind it. I set my shoulder to one and pushed the wrong way on purpose. It gave. A man wanting out would have to drag a crowd back off the door to open it. And there was no latch on the far face, only the swing set against him. Down at the refectory, I quit counting paces and started counting heads. The room sat 400 at the long boards. I had certified halls like it and signed the cards that said how many bodies a door could pass in a minute without a pile. One arch served this floor. I stood under it and spread my arms, fingertip to fingertip, a hand's width more, and the keystone still cleared my reach, wide enough for 2 boys abreast, not 3. Somewhere down the boards, a monitor sorted the new ones by year. "First years to the low benches," he said, bored, a rule worn smooth from saying. "Closest by the arch." The youngest, seated nearest the only mouth out of the room, which was also the only way in. 400 through a gap that takes 2. I did the arithmetic the way I always had, and what it gave back was not a span of minutes. It was a count of the ones who would not clear the arch before the rest came down on them. I ran my hand up the jamb to be sure of the stone. The face was not smooth. Under my palm, it went to ridges, then to grooves, short, finger width, raked downward at the height a standing man's hands would fall. I have seen tool marks. These were not tool marks. I fitted my own fingers into them without deciding to, and they sat in the channels as though the channels had been cut to my hand. They had been cut by a hand, by many, clawing, dressed granite that does not give. My feet had stopped. I had not told them to. Behind the next stretch of wall, a hung cloth stirred where there was no window. I lifted its corner. A chute dropped away into the dark, throat smooth, angled, too narrow to climb, and exactly wide enough to take a thing you did not mean to carry back up. The draft off it came cold and ran one way, down. Then the cold from the chute, and the grooves under my fingers, and the too wide arch all ran together in me, low, before I had any words to lay on them, and my hand came off the stone of its own accord. They had not raised a fortress and then chosen who would die inside it. They had built the dying into the courses. The inward doors, the arch sized to choke, the stair that climbs to a solid wall with no hollow behind it, the chute to take down what the choking left. None of it was a building that failed its people. It was a thing that did its work, only when the people failed. The wards drew their year off the count that did not get through. Galvart did not pick its dead from the crowd. It needed them in the mortar to stand at all, every course of it, the way a millstone needs the grain under it to turn. I stood beneath the keystone, with 400 unfilled places at my back, and read the whole machine at last, not in any drawing, but in the marks of the hands that had read it before me, too late, with their fingers, on the way down. A steward's voice came down the east passage, flat as a man reading weights off a card. "Marked ones to the back. They go in last." I was wiping the basin rail with my sleeve, honest motion, the kind that keeps a face from being red.
A third year stood beside me, chipped front tooth, hands to the wrist in cold water. He watched two small ones file past. "There," he said, "and there. You see it?" "See what?" "The mark." He tipped his chin at the nearer boy's temple. "Faint. Most can't. My gran could." He dried his hands on his shirt. "They don't tell you who. They just seat them careful." I looked where he looked and saw nothing. Then I stopped looking at the surface and let my eye go the way it goes at a wall, through, not at, and a smudge stood up under the boy's hairline, a gray thumbprint no thumb had left. It did not catch the lamp. It ate the light. "How many wear it?" "Enough," he shrugged. "Not you."
I checked. He said it kindly, which was the worst of it, and went. I walked to the ground hall, east dormitory, where the register had put her. She was on a low stool, mending a stocking, the needle going small and even. I had not learned her face properly in 3 days. I learned it then. I let my eye slide off the surface of her, the way I had at the basin, and the mark came up clean above her left brow. Gray. Lamp-eating. The boy's, exactly. The needle paused. "You're looking at me strange," she said, "counting your stitches. They're even." She held the stocking up, pleased, and the smudge sat there above her pleasure like a level bubble run off true. Out in the passage, the walls were louder than at dawn. The scraped voices had been water under ice. Now they had edges, and the edges had places. They thinned along the plain stone and bunched at the doorways, 3 and 4 deep, packed where a frame met a wall. I walked the corridor, and the chorus rose and fell with my feet, quiet on the open run, a press of them at every sill. Near the sealed arch, where the mortar went newest and wettest, they stopped being voices at all. They were one held note, leaning on the joint. Loudest where the building leaned hardest on its dead. So I went to a hall they called safe. The almonry, bread shelves, a warm flue, an old steward asleep over his ledger. No grooves on its jams. The dead barely whispered here. A room a man would pick to wait in. I had only ever read the lines when they came to me. I had never asked. I set my back to the flue, put my feet flat, and did what I used to do before I signed a card. I asked the room a plain question. Where would you send a body you did not want found? The banked coal lines woke slow. They ran the door I'd come in by, then past it. They crawled behind the bread shelves, down a seam in the plaster I'd have sworn was sound stone, and stopped dead at a wool hanging on the north wall, faded green, a hunting scene gone to mildew. I crossed and lifted its hem. Cold ran out across my ankles. Behind the cloth, the plaster gave way to a throat of dressed stone, angled down, smooth on every face, the draft off it running one way only, down. A second chute, in the safe room, behind the picture an old man slept under. I let the hanging fall. I stood with the warmth at my back and the cold at my feet, and I understood that I could open this building whenever I chose to ask it, and that wherever I asked, it gave me the same answer. "You came back," she said, eyes on the needle. "Your stool rocks." I crouched and got a hand under the short leg. The tenon had splayed in its socket. The old glue came off my thumb as gray dust. "Back left. You've been holding it down with your foot. You'll turn your ankle one of these days." She studied me sidelong, careful, the way you watch a strange dog before you trust its mouth. "Roan doesn't fix things. This one does." I rocked the loose leg free and scraped the hole clean with a nail. From the bench edge, I chewed off a thin sliver and packed it in to take up the slack. Honest work. It steadies the hands and lets the eye go where it likes. "Sit. Try it now." She didn't move at first. Then she set her foot down flat, on purpose not bracing it, and put her weight through. No rock. The corner of her mouth went, just barely.
It held, she said, like an accusation. It'll hold a year, longer than you'll need it. I stayed down at her level and nodded at the stocking. Heel's gone because your clog's split at the seam. Mending the sock won't save it. Show me the clog. She handed it over without thinking, then stopped, surprised at her own hand, the needle swinging by its thread. That was the whole of it. Not a word that could damn me, not one I'd have to take back. A child trusts the hand that mends her stool a long while before she trusts the mouth that swears it loves her. I turned the clog into the light.
Split along the welt, the stitching rotted soft. The same wet rot I'd thumbed out of the base course mortar. I noted it without meaning to. Then the gear in me came round. I had spent 3 days counting. Breaths, then days, 73 of them, holding the number like a rope. It held nothing. 73 was only the building's schedule, the date it meant to feed, and I had read that date the way the condemned read a sentence, for the morning they came and nothing else. Wrong reading. I let my eye walk the dormitory the way it used to walk a hall I'd been paid to condemn. The door swung inward, no latch a girl could throw. One window, painted shut, the sash cord cut and tucked to read whole. 12 to a room cut for 6. Every fault a line on a card I used to sign with my own hand. I had stopped asking how many days were left. I had started writing the building up. Course by course, fault by fault, the way I'd done it 40 years and 1 death ago, until I found the line that wouldn't carry its load. Because a thing built this carefully to fail had a failure in it somewhere of its own. Keep the clog off your foot till I bring leather, I told her, and stood. And the stool's yours now. Don't lend it. She turned it under her, testing the joint again, frowning at me like a sum whose columns wouldn't agree. You're strange, she decided. I know. At the door, I ran my thumb down the jamb where a latch should have lived, and found only smooth, planned wood. I started the list. The rector walked his building before the bell. I followed, 2 turns behind, broom in hand, sweeping a floor that did not need sweeping. Valen Moore carried no lamp. He went by touch, a palm laid flat to each course as he passed, the way a man reads the back of a horse he has owned a long time. I'd expected a tyrant, a heavy ring, a guard at the elbow, a voice. He had a length of knotted cord wound on a wooden cross, and he stopped to let it out against an arch and read the knots with his thumb. 4 fingers proud, he said. To no one. A mason behind him made the note. I knew those words. I had said those words. He went on to the choke arch above the dead stair, the one I'd measured and found sized to fail, and he stood under it the way I stand under a thing I respect. Throughput's wrong here, he told the mason. 6 abreast at the head, 2 at the foot. Crowd them and the crowd does the work. He set his hand on the keystone. Leave it. Then the screaming started. I'd heard the dead before, scraped through mortar, a thread of them at a seam, 3 voices at most. This was the whole north wall at once. They climbed off the stone where his palm had been and stood the hair up along my arms, and they did not let up until he took 2 slow steps and let the cord run out against a door frame further on. He did not flinch. He knew. He laid his hand back where they were loudest and held it there, and the sound bent around his fingers like water around a piling, and his face went tired and patient, a man enduring weather he had named. I hear you, he told the wall, low. I know what you cost me. He marked his slate. He moved on. I kept sweeping. His eyes had gone past me once already, and I did not want them coming back. He was not raving. That was the part I could not set down. He understood the load exactly as I understood it. How many bodies a course needs to keep its line, where the building wants more weight, how to feed it without leaving a pile at the foot of a stair. He had done the sum I'd spent 40 years refusing to finish. He had carried it to the far side and stayed there. Some must be mortar so the rest can stand. And then he had gone and laid the mortar himself,
by hand, in the dark, with the dead screaming up through his palm the whole while. I had signed cards rating doors.
I had written down how many would pass in a minute before the press began. The only thing between his slate and my card was one door I'd held shut with a steel cabinet while the children went out the other way. A thin thing. I felt it the way you feel a tread that gives a quarter inch under your heel. At the turning he stopped and looked back, not at me, at the wall above me, at the voices I could hear and he could not stop hearing. Same wall, same sound. 2 men in all of Galvart knew what the stone was saying, and one of us had built it to say that. The mortar board leaned against the base course, troweled flat on top. The stuff in it had not set the color lime sets, dark at the edges, near black where it met the stone, and wet a hand's width up the wall, though no weather reached this deep. I knew green mortar. This was days poured and still weeping. Valen Moore knelt to it. He didn't reach for the cord. He laid his bare palm flat to the new course, the way you press a hand to a beam you aren't sure of, held it, and his lips moved on a count. "This run carries to next harvest," he said, "not past it." The mason wrote. I set my broom against the wall and read the slate upside down, the trick of 40 years, and the figures stopped my hands where they were. They were mine. Occupant load, clear width at the pinch, how many bodies a course would hold, and how long the wall would stand under them before it spread. The same sum I'd signed 10,000 times, only run backward. I had measured how many a door passed in a minute before the press began. He was measuring how many the wall needed kept in to last the year. The rector stood and wiped his palm down his robe. It left a smear the color of liver. "Last year's run's gone soft at the 3rd course," he told the mason. "We'll want a heavier intake this spring. 40 to the foot won't hold the south wall now." 40 to the foot. He said it the way I'd have said it. Flat. A working number. The kind you write before lunch and don't think about again. Not a curse, then. Not a god's hunger working through the stone. Lime, aggregate, and arithmetic. The wards weren't sung back each spring. They were poured. The first years went into the foundation, so many to the running foot, and Galvart stood another 12-month on what they had been. The gray thumbprint above Liesel's brow wasn't a verdict handed down from anywhere. It was an assignment, a course. Which stone, which foot of wall? I understood it the way I understood everything in this place, by the load it carried. A wall is only what holds it up. He had found a cheaper fill than rubble, one that screamed but settled true, and he kept the books on it square. Which meant it was a building. Buildings I knew. A thing raised by a sum could be brought down by the same sum, one carried digit, one fault made to find its neighbor. I felt the thought arrive the way you feel a floor take your weight when you doubted it. Then the wet course began to talk. Not the old North Wall chorus, 4 centuries deep and worn to a thread. These were close, thin, new. A boy asked for water in a voice that hadn't finished breaking, and under him others, a whole season packed in by the running foot, still settling into their share of the load. Last spring's intake, the ones whose names had come off the dormitory register before mine. I had walked in here reading a building. I'd been reading a ledger the whole time, ruled spring by spring, course on course, kept as careful as the warden's list nailed at chest height. And somewhere in the squared figures on that slate, dated and clean, was the foot of south wall where, come the thaw, they meant to set my sister. The mason came for me at the cistern. "Rector wants the new sweeper." Not a question. Charcoal black under his nails, and he watched the broom in my hands, not my face. The way you check a tool is the one you sent for. I followed. I counted the doors going up. 3, and not one latched from my side. Valen Moore's room ran warm. A brazier, a long table, the knotted cord coiled on its wooden cross at the edge of it. He bent over a slate and let me stand a while before he straightened. A man who makes you wait is telling you the load before he speaks. You measure, he said, eyes still down. 3 days. The stair off the refectory. The choke arch, you paced it twice, then stood under it counting. I held the broom and gave him nothing. A boy who failed his letters does not pace a span and read its rise. He looked up. Mild eyes, a tradesman's, tired at the corners. Unless he was a thing before he was the boy. Sit, he said. I stayed on my feet. He marked that, the small way he'd mark a course gone soft, and went on without it. You found the foundation. Most never look down. They count their 70 days and weep at the bread. You went to the wall and asked what it carried. His thumb came down on a figure I could read upside down from where I stood. 40, a foot drawn beside it. You know what I know. There are not 2 of us in 100 years. He came around the table. No lamp on him. He knew the room by his feet. The wards fail. The place comes down. Not 40 in a spring, 400 in an afternoon. The whole hill folding onto the dormitories at once. I have done that arithmetic. So have you, the other way round at some door. His voice never lifted. I am not asking you to like the wall. I am asking you to help me build it kinder. Fewer to the foot, if the mix runs truer. The one's already going. Quieter in the stone. You have the eye for where a course will spread before it spreads. Stand with me, and the screaming gets shorter every year you live. It was a good pitch. Reasoned, costed, square in the books. He believed every word, which is what nearly made it hold. I knew the shape of it. I'd heard it once in a gray corridor, from a man with a clipboard and a soft, sorry mouth, the night they wheeled the steel cabinet up to the fire door on its casters. We can't hold every exit, Roan. Be reasonable. Pick the number we can defend. He'd said it kindly, too. He'd had figures, too. 40 years of cards in my hand never taught me to call that math a lie, because it wasn't one. The lie sat in the word defensible, in deciding which door you'd let fail before the press ever started. So I stood in the warm room and felt the floor for what it was. Sound underfoot, square in every figure, rotten at the one joint that mattered. It still screams, I said. It always will. Then it isn't kinder. It's only quieter for you. His mouth moved, not anger. He filed it, the way he weighed the weeping corse, to take out and turn over later. I set the broom against the table leg, square, the way I'd leave any tool. I'll think on the offer. True, the way most working answers are true, with one other thing folded under. Then I went to the door. 3 doors back to the yard, none of them mine to latch, and I'd be counting every one of them down with my pulse where it had no business being. His voice took me at the threshold, quiet and set exactly, like a thumb finding the knot it wanted on the cord. Roan Aldous. I stopped without turning. Whoever you were before they wrote you on the list, he said. You read joints like a man who signed his name under them. I'd wondered who came walking my halls, reading the courses for me. Now I have the face. The crack came up through the floorboards before it reached my ears. A study hall, 2nd floor. 2 long benches, a dozen heads bent over slates, chalk dust hanging in the cold light. I felt the give the moment I stepped in, a tread that dropped a 1/4 inch under my heel and stayed down. Under the smell of pine and damp wool, lower than that, a timber was groaning past its work. I got on my knees. The floor told the rest by hand. The main girder under the span had split along the grain, a long, dry shake, and the load was creeping out onto 2 joists never meant to take it. The bench legs sat right over the worst of it. 12 boys, 1 span. Off the bench, I said. Nobody moved. A first year with ink on his lip looked at me like I'd spoken Galvart backwards. Now, against the wall. I didn't lift my voice. The monitor opened his mouth, and I was already hauling the bench out from under them by its end, dragging it toward the bearing wall where the floor still held. Then I went down the hatch. The crawl space ran low, a man's depth, packed earth, the girder a hand above my spine. I found the split by feel, the wood nosing down where it had begun to fail. I needed a post and something solid to stand it on. "You," I said it to the big shape filling the doorway above. A post, shoulder height, and a flat stone, broad as 2 hands. He didn't ask why. He went and came back fast, a stair baluster snapped at one end, a slab of hearthstone under his arm. When he passed them down into the dark, his hands came into the light. Split nails, mortar ground deep into the knuckles, a mason's hands. I bedded the stone flat on the earth, stood the baluster plumb off it, drove a wedge under the split where the girder had started to dip. The timber complained. I tapped the wedge with the heel of my hand, a finger's width at a time, watching the sag come back up. Not far, 1/8 of an inch, enough to lift the load off the 2 joists and set it down where the ground could carry it. The floor went quiet. Above me, 12 pairs of feet stood exactly where I'd put them, and not one board sang. I checked the seat of the stone, the plumb of the post, the bite of the wedge. Then I worked my way out filthy through the hatch. The big one was still crouched there, watching the brace, not me. "That'll hold," he said, "till someone sizes a new girder." The shore's only borrowing time off the dirt. He climbed halfway down and looked along the line of it himself, sighted the plumb, pressed the wedge with one thumb, ran a finger over the split to read which way it would travel next. He knew how to look. That was the thing I marked. He read the joint the way I read it, from the load backward. 3 years I've laid stone in this place," he said. He didn't take his eyes off the brace. "Cut block, struck joints, kept my courses true. They call it craft." Something in his jaw that had been set a long while came loose. "It isn't. It's butchery with a trowel, and I knew it, and I kept laying." The first years had drifted back to the edge of the hatch, watching the dark under the floor, watching me come up out of it. "Bram," the mason said. He put his bricklayer's hand down to me, not to shake, to haul me up the last of the way, the grip of a man crediting a load to its post. "That down there," he nodded at the wedge holding in the cold. "That's the first true thing I've seen built in here since they brought me through the gate." He held on a beat past the lift. "Whatever you're measuring, I want under it with you." "Nobody takes the north stair," the boy said, and dragged his sleeve down over the gray above his brow. I asked why. He wouldn't say. He only pointed, the way you point at a dog that's bitten you. So I went and stood at the foot of it. The treads were oak, well bedded, no rod at the nosings, no spring in the run. By every measure, I trusted it was the soundest stair in the wing, and the boys walked the long way round to miss it. Then the overlay woke. The banked coal lines I'd been reading for weeks climbed the wall beside the steps, and here they didn't run. They guttered. The path crawled 3 treads and went out, like a lamp drawing bad air. The cold came up off the 7th step, not draft. Something that pulled the warmth out of my fingers and kept it. And under that, faint, a sound I'd heard once in scraped mortar. Small voices working at a word they couldn't finish. This is where the bones stopped telling me everything. I knelt and read what I could. The stair was true. The wrong thing sat in the plaster, a seam of it warm, then dead cold, then warm again. A pulse with no heart I could name. "You're standing in the bleed." A girl, 2 steps above me, where I'd have sworn the stair was empty. Thin, ink to the knuckle, a burn scar on the web of her thumb in the shape of a small geometry gone wrong. She came down without touching the rail. "It isn't haunted," she said. "It's leaking. Someone struck the ward crooked, and it's been emptying down these steps for a year." She crouched and held 2 fingers an inch off the 7th tread. "Lamp ward. Same hand as the marks they cut on the little ones. Eats light and warmth, and feeds it somewhere lower." The cold leaned toward her fingers. "You read it," I said. "I trained to. 3 years,
until they put me out for asking what the wards were for. She looked at me sidelong. You weren't reading the ward. You were reading the steps. The steps are sound. The way through them isn't. I had to know if she'd see it, so I laid my palm flat where the coal line died and gave her the structure, not the overlay. Here the path climbs. Here it stops. Route the children round this seam and out the west door. Nothing of the burning blueprint, only the wall. She set her own hand a foot left of mine, flat to the plaster, and shut her eyes. There, she said. Her finger came down exactly where my line went dark. That's the throat of it. You can't see the ward, and you found its throat. I found where the path quits. Same wall, different eye. She opened her eyes on me. You read the bone. I read what's bleeding through it. We fixed the stair before the bell.
I dragged the worn runner over to the west run and scuffed the dead treads, so the boy's habit had a reason it could keep. Then I watched her work. She drew one finger down the seam and pinched it closed at the throat, and the cold drew back 2 steps and held there, penned. She wiped her thumb on her skirt. Mira. Roan? She nodded at the wall between us, the one we'd both just read true from opposite sides. Show me the rest of your map. I'll tell you which walls are lying. Pell caught my sleeve in the cellar passage and put his mouth to my ear, barely sound at all. Don't take a lamp down. The last boy did. He was a first year, ink dried into his cuffs, one hand clamped over a ring of registry keys so they wouldn't speak. Behind him, an upperclassman waited with his arms crossed. Cale. He'd watched me read 3 walls this week and said nothing each time. Show me, I said. The cellar stair was stone, well bedded, no spring in the run. At the 4th tread, my candle stopped breathing right. The flame shrank to a blue bead and leaned, not toward any draft, but toward the floor, dying from the bottom up. I held on that step. Below, the dark sat heavy and did not stir. Toller went down for turnips, Pell whispered from the top. Sat on the last step and never got up. They said the cold took him. It wasn't the cold. I'd watched it once in a grain pit, 2 men down inside a minute, the second walking in after the first. Bad air, heavier than good, pooling low and patient. Keep your flame above your waist, I told them. Under that, there's nothing in this room to breathe. Cale came down 2 steps and crouched, reading my face instead of the wall. You've smelled this before. I've measured it. Then I worked. A coal chute hatch sat nailed shut in the passage ceiling above, gone, disused. I set Cale's shoulder under it and my pry bar to the nails, and we tore it open to the yard. Real cold fell through. I propped the cellar door wide on a stone and sent Pell to crack the buttery window 2 floors up, so the house had a throat. Low door, high hole. The fowl drawn up and out of it. We waited. I watched the candle. The blue bead climbed back to yellow and stood up straight. Cale went down before I finished telling him not to. He came up carrying nothing, his jaw grinding. Toller's still in the corner. A year. They left him for the damp to keep. He set the dead boy's name down like a stone he'd hauled too far. You did that with a hatch and a window. Pell hadn't moved from the doorway. His hand was still on the keys. No ward, no rector. Just air. Just air. He worried his lip. I keep the registries. First year's in, first year's not out. I'm the one writes the not out part. His voice thinned to nothing. I want that line to mean something else. That was his reason, and I took it whole. Cale's came up different. He'd stopped at the foot of the cleared stair and stood in the dark, resenting it for letting him breathe. 3 Thors back, they walked my cohort to the south wall, he said. 40 went down to the foot. I came up. I've hated every winter since for the same offense. He looked at the open hatch, the honest cold pouring through. You don't want to save them. You want the whole house down. Both. Then we're off to 2 things.
He said it flat, no heat in it, a man squaring 2 blocks that wouldn't course. Mine's the second one. I marked it where I'd remember. The seam already ran between them, the clerk who needed the count to come out clean, the survivor who needed the building to die. One winter, it would open under load. Cale spat into the damp and put his hand out across it anyway. Show me which wall comes first. Mira had warded a flat stone to hold the lamp's heat without showing a flame, and we toasted the stolen bread on it. 6 of us folded into a room the size of a confessional. I'd picked it for the door.
It swung outward into the passage. On a hinge I'd rehung so it bit at the top and dropped clear at the bottom. Pull, and it gave. Lean, and it held. Bram had sistered the lintel with 2 oak offcuts. The walls here told the truth. No cold bled through, no gray hum, nothing pooling at the floor. The only honest room in Galvart. And we'd made it. Liesel sat with her back to the braced wall, where I'd put her without saying why. She ate slow. Then she pressed her palm flat to the timber behind her, the way she'd watched me do, and held it there. It's warm, she said. The whole house is cold, and this is warm. Wood holds your heat back to you. Stone takes it. She looked at me a long moment over the crust, not at the boy, at the thing in him that knew which wall would keep her. You always know where to sit, which step. She didn't make it a question. I measure. That was enough for her. She leaned into the wood and let it warm her, and something in her face eased that hadn't eased since the day of the register. Bram broke it. He'd been turning his trowel, edge to handle, edge to handle. There's a coal road out the north under the buttery, he said, low. Mira's stair, your hatch, the chute to the yard. 3 doors, all open now. He didn't look at me. He looked at her. We could have her pass the wall before the thaw, her and the small ones. Walk them out and run. The room went still around the lamp. It was the right route. I'd walked it twice and counted it clean. That was the trouble. My hands already knew the door I'd open and the one I'd pull shut behind us to buy the minutes. How many out the chute before they hear? Cale said. 8? 10? Then they'd double the count to make the foot. You walk 10, and you bury 20 for it. So we take who we can. Bram's voice cracked. We can't hold every door. I knew that sentence. A soft, sorry mouth had handed it to me once over a clipboard, the night a steel cabinet went to the fire door. The lie had never been in the arithmetic. It sat in the word defensible, in a man deciding before the press began which door he'd let fail. Roan, Liesel's hand found my sleeve. He means me. Take me and go. I looked at her hand on my arm, at Cale across the lamp who wanted the whole house down, at Pell whose ledger needed the not out column emptied to nothing. Every face wanted a different exit. No, I said. Bram's jaw worked. She's why you're here. She's why I started. I set the bread down. If I carry her out the chute and pull the door on the rest, I'm the cabinet. I spent 40 years putting my name to the door I left shut. I won't sign this one. Then what? Cale said, flat. All of them or none? All of them. The house after that. Pell's hand went white on his keys. You can't get all of them out one chute. No. I turned my cup so the cracked rim faced away. So we don't use the chute. We make the whole wall the door. Nobody answered. Bram stared at me like I'd asked him to lift the roof off. Cale almost smiled, for the first time, the wrong reason, but a smile. Liesel took her hand from my sleeve, slow, and folded it into her lap. The warm room tilted under us, 2 wants grinding for the same load. Mira snapped the chalk line and let it bite the stone. Blue dust drifted into the joint and stayed there. We worked the dead watch, between the last bell and the first, the lamp hooded down to a coal. I scraped a thumbnail of mortar from a low course. She set her palm an inch above it. The voice came up through her hand the way damp comes through a sill, slow, sure, from below. A boy, it said, under the third refectory step. She chalked a cross on the riser and we moved on. This was work I knew, not the curse, the survey. Every voice gave a place, and every place gave a line. Bram laid the string. He pinned one end at the cross beneath the stair, drew it taut to the choke arch, then down from the arch to the foot of the south wall. And where the cord pulled straight, the shape stood up off the floor. The load didn't run like a house carries weight. It ran like a throat. Wide at the doors, narrowing, narrowing. Every line bent toward one swallowing point. "Conduit," Mira said, flat-handed against a pier. "It runs warm, not heat. Something's being drawn down it." Her lips had gone the color of the chalk. She marked it with a double stroke anyway, and Pell copied the double stroke onto his vellum before I could name it. That was the rule we'd settled. Nothing lived in one skull. Whatever I read off the brick, Pell wrote. Whatever the wall told Mira, the slate held it. He printed in a clerk's flat hand, no cipher, big enough for a first year to sound out. The not out column turned slowly into a drawing. Cale paced the doors and called the counts back over his shoulder. "Refectory arch, 4 handspans. Buttery passage, 3. I logged each one against the string. The choke points fell where the lines crowded, exactly where they'd crowd, and Bram's jaw tightened each time the cord proved me right before I'd finished speaking. "He built it to read," Bram said once, very low, "if you knew how. He built it so no one would." We crawled the buttery undercroft on our bellies and scraped a course the mortar had gone near black in. 3 voices at once there, layered, none of them loud. Mira held until her arm shook, then pulled back and sat down hard against a barrel. I gave her the count to copy, so her hands had something true to do. Liesel held the far end of the string where I set her, by the outward door, away from the warm pier. She watched the lines reach toward her wall and stop a span short. She didn't ask why I'd stopped them there. She only wound the slack twice round her knuckle and kept it taut. By the third bell, we'd run out of floor. I hooded the lamp full and lifted it, and we stood over what we'd made. The whole undercroft lay drawn beneath us in chalk and string. Doors as short bars. Crosses where the children had gone in, scattered thick under the stairs and thicker under the arch. Lines off every cross, drawn taut to the south wall, where they gathered and pinched and poured down into the foundation course like rope through a single ring. The warm conduits ran red where Mira had doubled them, threading the load from throat to foot. Beside it, on the vellum, the same thing in Pell's plain letters, a copy a stranger could carry out and understand. For 40 years I'd drawn floors so people could leave them. Here was the inverse, finally flat and still and readable. Every door that fed it, every line that narrowed, the exact stone where the funnel ended. Bram looked from the floor to me. "Now we can see it. Now anyone can." I crouched and set my finger on the choke arch, where 6 lines met and became one. That's the swallow. Break that, and the throat can't pull. Liesel let out her end of the string. It went slack across the marks, and the drawn machine lay open under the coal light, no longer hidden in the dark of his hands, sitting on the stone where we could finally take it apart. The chalk cross under the third step had begun to smear where Liesel's heel kept crossing it. I knelt and redrew it, a clean X, and that small repair was what turned my thinking over. I set my palm flat on the riser. The coal lines rose under the wall, corridors, the service hatch, the bend of the throat. I lifted my hand, and the overlay held in the brick a moment, banked, before it sank. "Mira, put your reed on the arch. Tell me where it pulls hardest." She came on her knees, palm hovering, and found the doubled mark. "Here," she said. "Everything leans this way. The arch drinks first, then passes it down." "Why the arch?"
Because it's narrowest? She frowned at her own hand. Narrow runs warm.
Wide runs cold. A load path. I'd read 10,000, water to the low drain, smoke to the open stair, weight to the softest joist. The draw wasn't a curse choosing children. It was a current taking the easy line. I scraped a thumbnail of mortar from a fat, sound course 3 feet off the throat, a stretch the lines had ignored all night. Read this. Her hand settled. Cold, she said. Nothing wants it. Now. I pressed my thumb into the joint and worried it, loosening the bed a knife's width, opening the course the smallest gape. Again. Her palm came down. Her breath caught. It moved. She looked up, chalk dust pale on her cheek. A thread came off the arch. To here, just a thread. The floor of 40 years tilted under me and came level at a new pitch. It chooses, I said. It doesn't hold a fixed road. Give it a narrower throat than the south wall, a weaker bed, and the current turns. I sat back on my heels. Every ritual's a structure. Any structure can be failed. Bram had stopped paying out string. Turn it where? Somewhere it can pour and take nothing. I set my finger on the choke arch, then drew it 3 feet off, to the cold course warming now under our hands. We don't break the swallow. We give it a hungrier mouth and let it choose. Mira's hand stayed on the loosened joint. It's already choosing, she said. The second line was there, faint, a thread off the arch that hadn't existed a minute before. Pell's chalk scratched. He drew the new thread without being told, a hair branching from the throat toward a stone that fed nothing. Liesel watched the line cross away from her wall. She wound her end of the string once more round her knuckle and held it taut. I knew the machine now the way I knew a stair, not as a sentence handed down, but as flow, pulling always toward the weakest invitation, and steerable by whoever cut the next weak point first. 4th bell. We went up the dead stair to finish the count. I'd walked it twice. Twice it held, and I let that stand for safe. A thing walked twice is a thing known. That was my rule and my error in one sentence. Etta carried the tallow stub ahead of me. I'd seated her in the safe room myself the night before, back to the braced wall, and she'd come out again because she would not be parted from the light. Marked like her sister, the gray sigil eating the flame at her collar. 6 years old. Sure on stone she had no business trusting. Bram came 2 treads below me with chalk to mark the corbels as we climbed. The treads were cantilevered straight into the wall, no stringer, each step bearing on the course beneath. Solid, I'd read it. I read it again going up, and the mortar between the 3rd and 4th course ran dark. Blood dark. Same as the throat. Etta, back to me. Flat, no hurry in it. She turned on the tread to see why. That was all the load it asked. The 4th step dropped a finger's width and held. I felt it through my soles before the sound reached me, the soft give of a bed letting go, the breath a floor takes before it quits you. Hand, now. She gave it. I had her wrist, warm, small, the stub still burning in her other fist. Then the stair did the work it was built for. It didn't break. Breaking is loud. This folded, tread shedding off tread, top to bottom, each corbel handing its failure down to the next, a clean cascade dressed to carry weight into the dark and keep it there. The step under her went. I held her wrist, and the wall opened where her body should have caught, and there was nothing beneath her. Nothing under me to brace on, my own tread sliding out from my boots. I held a fire door once with all my weight while a steel cabinet on the far side held it shut, and the small ones went out the wrong way through the gap. Building 1248. I felt it again now, to the ounce, the pull I could not out-pull. Her wrist left my fingers a knuckle at a time. Roan. Not a scream, a question, almost polite. The stub fell first, turning, and lit the drop under her. Dressed stone all the way down, smooth, funneled, no ledge to snag a child, built so nothing would stop the fall. Then her hand was out of mine. The gray light at her collar went down with the flame, both of them shrinking together, and at the foot the cold course took the thread it had pulled for all night. The stair settled. Dust climbed. Below us the throat drank once and went quiet. Bram's chalk had stopped. I knelt on the torn edge with my hand still open around the shape of a wrist that was not there. The dust settled the way it does in a still shaft, straight down, no drift. I held the empty curve of my hand until it stopped standing in for anything. Below us, the throat had drunk and gone shut. Bram did not move on his tread. "Light," I said. He brought the chalk stub up. I put my eye to the torn edge and read the failure the way I'd read 1,000 others, backward, from the wreck to the hand that built it. The fourth corbel was bedded a finger short, not worn short, cut. Someone had set it that way and dressed the face to hide the gap, the same trick down every step of the cascade. I pressed my thumb to the seam. It came away tacky and dark, and I said the numbers aloud because saying them held my hands still. Tread, drop, the angle they'd cut the shaft to so nothing falling could catch. "Roan," Bram's whisper. "What are you doing?" "Logging it." 40 years I'd filled cards on my knees like this. A death you can only grieve. A violation you can carry to the man who signed it. So I wrote her the one way I had hands for. Not Edda. A finding. Bed short. Fastening absent. Fall unarrested by design. Keeper's mark on the failed course. My thumb stopped on that last word. Keeper's mark. The wall read by touch, course by course, by a hand it trusted. Valen had tended this. Valen seated the short corbel, and the building took his word for where the weak place was, because the current doesn't hunt the fault. It goes to the fault the keeper names. I sat back on the torn lip. The plan rolled over and showed its underside. "Mira," I called down the shaft, soft, and her face came pale into the throat below. When the draw chose the cold course, it chose what we'd marked. Not the weakest stone. The stone we told it was weakest. "We loosened it," she said. "So it read it." Whatever his hand tends, the wall believes. I looked at the dark on my thumb and left it there. We've been trying to outbuild the architect. We don't. We let the building keep trusting him, and we move his mark. Bram came up a tread. Move it where? Onto his own work. The south wall. The course he meant to set Liesel into. The bed he'd dressed with his own palm. The swallow he'd cut to pull true. We make Valen's design the hungriest mouth in the house. The harvest selects by his hand. So we turn his hand. Nobody spoke. The shaft ticked as the stone gave up its heat. I drew it on the dressed stone with the dark on my thumb, the throat, the 6 lines, the swallow where they met. Then one short stroke off the arch, bent back toward the place a keeper defends last. The building would do its own breaking. We only had to make it read Valen's course as the short one, the way it had just read ours. "That's the door," I said. "Not the chute, not the wall. Him. We feed the hunger the hand that's been feeding it." I marked the swallow once more, harder, pressing until the chalk dark sat in the cut like a name signed into a ledger. The keystone went home under my thumb. Everything past it was carpentry. The wedge was gone from under the larder door. I'd cut it myself, a folded shim of oak that kept the latchless slab from swinging to and shutting on a child's hand. Someone had drawn it in the night. The door sat true and closed now, the way the rector kept his doors, and the cold came under it instead of a child going out. I stood in the passage and counted what else had moved. A sweeper at the stairhead who had never swept there. He held his broom like a man who'd been told to hold a broom. His eyes did the actual work. At first bell, the proctor read the roll, and it had grown teeth. "Bram to the kilns!" A floor down, a wall over.
Mira, the wash house. Out past the yard. Pell, night soil. Kale, the carts. He spread my crew across the house on separate bells and separate stairs, so that by the time I'd walked to one of them, the next was already somewhere I couldn't reach. The list was clean. It read like care. I went to the room under the chapel stair, the one we'd hung a door on that opened the right way. A clerk was chalking "Stores" on the lintel. "Reassigned," he said, not unkindly, and went on writing. Our safe room left the books between two strokes of a thumb. The bed where Etta had slept stood stripped to the rope, and someone had already squared the frame against the wall to make space for sacks. I found Pell behind the kiln yard with his sleeve up. "They took my slate off Mira," he said. "Walked into the wash and lifted it. Said unmarked slates were the bursars." His jaw worked. 2 days of count. Gone. "Where's the brick?" He turned his forearm. Down the inside, small, in his own dried scratch, ran the swallow, the 6 lines, the short stroke off the arch, what I'd cut into the dressed stone, copied into skin so it couldn't be lifted off a shelf. The boy had read me before I'd known I'd taught him. "Good," I said. "Now Cale carries half of that, and you never tell him which half." He nodded. He was 11, and he understood it the way a man understands a thing he'll die over. The proctor found me at the noon roll with a fresh sheet. "Early setting," he read, "by the rector's word."
6 names, ahead of the thaw, to ease the spring count. He read the 6. 3 were mine. Marked children, the gray on their collars, called to the south end before the day we'd built every plan around. Thin the herd ahead of the slaughter, and the slaughter looked smaller. I'd signed off on enough crowd control to know the math from the inside. So I learned what the squeeze was. Not a wall coming down on us, a wall coming down by inches, surveillance to find the record, dispersal to break the crew, the books rewritten so the protections we'd hung simply ceased to have ever stood, and a culling staged to take 3 of mine before I could move them. Everything legal, everything in his hand. I went back to work because the work was the only answer that fit. Mira met me at the wash door with wet arms and read my face. "We rebuild the count," she said. "Smaller, faster, in 3 skulls, not 1. I told her Pell's arm, told her Cale got the back half blind, told her she'd hold the south end timings and nothing else, so no single child taken in the early setting could carry away the whole. The record had to survive losing any one of us. It had to survive losing me. That was the morning the rector came to inspect. He came alone, no proctor, and set a 3-legged stool down at the mouth of my corridor where I was chalking tread heights onto the riser stone. He sat. He laid his palm flat on the wall beside him the way he always did, and his lips moved, "I hear you," to the one screaming under his hand, and then his eyes came to my marks and stayed. He didn't ask what they were. He read them. I watched him read the swallow off the stone as fast as I'd set it there, his head tilting at the short stroke off the arch, his thumb finding the bedded course without looking, the keeper's hand confirming what the keeper's hand had already done. "Carry on, sweeper," he said, and folded his own hands in his lap to watch me build the thing meant to end him, line by line, in front of the one man in Galvart who could read it the instant I wrote it. "You move my corridors at night," Valen said. "I solve them by dawn." He said it without heat, the way a man reports weather he has lived in too long to fear. He had come back to the stool the next morning, and the morning after. By the third, he no longer pretended to inspect. He sat at the mouth of my passage while I chalked, and we worked the same wall from opposite sides. I had cut a new weak point in the dark, off the 3rd course, a knife's width and no more. He found it by touch before the kilns were lit. His thumb stopped on the loosened bed, pressed once, and the draw he'd hear in the stone leaned back toward the throat where he wanted it. "You'll tire," he said. "I have 11 years of sleep on you." I marked a tread height and didn't answer. The chalk squeaked. Somewhere below us, a barrow of clinker went over with a sound like teeth in a jar. "You think I was always the hand on the wall." He turned his palm up in his lap,
an old man showing me a callus. I came to this house younger than you read it. I counted doors. I counted the dead corses, and I found the same fault you found, that the swallow takes the easy line, that a current can be steered. His voice stayed level. I built a plan to take them all out, whole, not one set in the wall. The chalk stopped on its own. I moved the keeper's mark, he said. South wall, hungrier mouth. Your plan? Near enough. I was proud of it. I lay awake the way you lie awake now, certain I'd outthought the stone. He pressed the loosened bed again, gently, the way you'd settle a child. The wall came down by inches anyway. It took the ones I'd hidden first, because I'd told it where they were. A foundation is owed its weight, sweeper. Move the mouth, and it eats elsewhere.
Starve it, and it eats the house is 40 years of children. I learned the sum the slow way. He let that sit. Under his hand, the screaming I couldn't hear went on, and his lips moved, once I hear you, before his eyes came back to me. Some become mortar so the rest stand. I didn't choose that. I arrived at it, the way water arrives downhill. He nodded at my marks. You'll arrive there too. You're closer than you'll admit. You've already chosen which of yours carries which half of the record, which means you've already costed losing one of them. That's the first stone of my wall. You laid it yesterday. I made myself keep my face the way I'd kept it for the rector in the doorway, years ago, in another life, smiling at the condemned because the alternative was to be seen. I held it. The cold came up through the riser stone into my heels. You don't know what I've costed, I said. I know the arithmetic doesn't love you back. He stood, the stool's 3 feet scraped. He was old, and he rose like a man whose knees were a structure he no longer trusted. One hand to the wall, and the wall took his weight the way it took everything. I'm going to spare you the 11 years. How? Liesel. The name in his mouth was clean, no weight on it, a clerk reading a roll. He watched it land. Stop, he said. Stop cutting weak points. Let the early setting take the 6. Let the thaw take its count. Do that, and I lift her name off the south wall, hers alone. The gray stays on her brow. I can't take the sigil. The stone knows her now. But she goes uncut. She lives to be old. You have my hand on it, and my hand has held this house together longer than yours has held a broom. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He had found the one course in me that bore the whole load and laid his thumb on it. I thought about Etta's wrist leaving my fingers on the dead stair. I thought about 3 names on the early setting sheet that were mine, and the wash house, and the kilns, and the night soil, and Cale at the carts carrying half a record blind. I thought about the math I'd signed off on for 40 years, the math that always wanted to spare the building by spending the few, and how every time I'd signed it, a door had held shut while children ran the wrong way. You take everyone but her, I said, to be sure I had the shape of it, and I help you do it by doing nothing. You stand still, he said. That's all. Standing still has saved more people than you'd believe. He almost smiled, and the almost was the worst of it, because it was kind. I'm not your enemy, Roan. I'm you after the bill came due. I'm offering you the one outcome I was never offered. Take her out of the wall and put down the chalk. He waited. The passage was quiet enough to hear the chalk dust settle off the riser. Out in the yard, a barrow squealed and stopped. He had built the trade so that the only way to save the one was to feed him all the rest, and the only way to fight for the rest was to set my own sister into the stone with my own silence. And he stood there with his hand flat on the wall, certain, patient, holding the door of it open for me to walk through. Sleep on it, Valen said. She has until the thaw either way. You have until then to be wise. He left the stool where it stood. I looked at the loosened bed in the 3rd course, the knife's width fault that was hers and theirs at once, and I did not pick up the chalk, and I did not put it down. They came for Pell before the wash water was warm. 2 keepers, no shouting, one with the early setting slate held flat like a serving tray. He read the name off it the way you'd read a delivery docket. Pell was 12. He had a cowlick that never lay down and a habit of checking the older boys to learn the weather, and he checked me now across the steam off the trough. I had set my face the way I once set it for the rector. It did not help him. The coal door at the end of the south corridor swung inward on a single strap hinge. I'd logged that hinge my 2nd week, and it took his weight and let it through and did not bang. He didn't fight. He didn't know yet that he should. The crew tore that night in the wash house over the cold tubs. Bram had Pell's spare shirt balled in his fist. "You had the one," he said. "Valen gave you Liesel clean, and you said no, and now there's a hole where Pell was. You traded him. Keep your voice under the wheel noise." "I won't." His knuckles went white on the linen. Mira put her shoulder between us, not for my sake, for the quiet. Cale was already by the door with his boots laced, a heel of bread in his coat, wearing the look of a boy who has decided the wall behind him is thinner than the men in front of him. "I'm going through the malt hatch tonight," Cale said. "Anyone with sense comes." "The malt hatch puts you on the drying floor," I said. "One door, outward opening, barred from the yard side. You'd stand on a 6-foot drop with your back to a locked leaf and wait." I wasn't pleading. I was reading him the floor. "They sweep it at 2nd bell. You'd last to the 3rd. The bread came down to his side. "You don't get to plan us anymore," Bram said. "Your plan eats us, one at a time." That was the fracture, laid open and bleeding, and inspiration would have closed it false. I didn't have any. I had the stone. "Come here, all of you. I'll show you whether it eats us for nothing." I took them down the service run to the south face, past the choke arch, to the 3rd course where the bed sat loosened a knife's width. I had a twist of dry hearth ash in my pocket. I'd carried it 3 days for exactly this, and hated that I'd need it. "Watch the draw," I said, and let a pinch fall from chest height. The ash didn't drop straight. It leaned. It pulled toward the south bed and went gray into the loosened joint, every speck, as if the wall had inhaled through that one knuckle of gap. Mira made a small sound. Bram's fist came open without his deciding it. 3 weeks ago that ash fell at the choke arch, I said. It falls here now. The mouth moved because we moved it. The current goes where the fault is named, and the fault is named here, by us, away from the dormitories, away from Liesel's brow. Into the one face we've fed nothing. I crouched, set 2 fingers to the cold joint. On the day, the wall takes its weight from where the keeper points it. We point it at empty stone. That's the trade. Not Pell for nothing. Pell, so this leans. Bram knelt beside me. He put his fingers where mine had been, felt the cold pull off the gap, and something went out of his shoulders. "Then we don't waste him," he said, low. "No. What's left to do?" I'd carried that answer a long way, and I gave it plain. 1 cut. The 4th corbel on this face is bedded a finger short already, their trick, dressed to hide the gap. I open it the rest of the way and seat a wedge of green oak. The thaw swells the oak. The corbel lets go on its own, on the day, with no hand near it for them to catch. Once it's driven, there's no drawing it back without splitting the course, and a split course is a thing Valen would have to report. He won't. He's let the mark stand once already. He'll let the stone keep its own counsel. "And us," Mira said. "Marks." I looked at each of them in the lamp-eaten dark. "Cale, you're at the drying floor hatch, not tonight, on the day, and you bar it the instant the draw turns, so nothing crawls back through. Mira, the dormitory latches. Every one chalked open at 4th bell, no exceptions. One shut door makes a dead end, and a dead end fills. Bram carries the count to the kilns and back. Liesel walks the middle of the column where the draw runs thinnest, and she does not stop for anyone. Me included. And you? I drive the wedge, I said. Then I'm wherever the floor needs a man standing on it. I took the chisel from my coat and laid the iron against the corbel's short bed, and it found the seam the keeper had cut and hidden, and I set my palm flat to the head of it. "Every one of you on your mark," I said, "or it eats the house instead of the stone. There's no second drive." I struck. The fortress changed shape at fourth bell. Not the stone, the air in it. The draw I'd charted for weeks turned all at once, a whole building taking one breath, and every loose thing slid south. Chaff off the malt floor, a tin cup rolling, not falling. The cold came off the walls in a sheet and went hunting for the joint we'd named. I'd run this 100 times, the other way round. You open the far doors, the people go out through them, the smoke follows the people. Tonight, I opened nothing for people. I opened the mouth and turned it on the man who'd cut the stone to feed it. The corbel let go with no hand near it. Green oak, swollen, 3 days driven, the short bed gave on its own, and the fourth course settled a finger's width with a sound like a tooth leaving a jaw. The draw doubled. It had its fault now, named and open, in the one face we'd starved. The blueprint woke on the walls, banked coal brightening course by course, and for once, it ran my lines and not theirs. The current bending off the dormitory doors, off Liesel's brow, into the empty south. The dead felt the turn. Low in the stone, they went from many voices to one, the way water finds a single drain. Down the column the marks held. Bram's count came back from the kilns, steady. Liesel walked the middle where the draw ran thinnest, did not stop, did not look at me. Cale was a shape at the drying floor hatch, with his hand on the bar. Mira worked the dormitory line ahead of them. Every latch chalked, no exceptions, and the turned current fought her for each one. A shut door makes a dead end. A dead end fills. I came on her at the 9th leaf, with 8 chalked behind her, and the wind leaning the iron against her arm the whole length of the run. The 9th wanted to close. The draw had got behind it, a foot of oak with the whole south face pulling at its back, and her chalk skidded off the worn sill. "Get clear of the swing," I said. She didn't. She set the chalk again and drove it with the heel of her hand, and the leaf came back on the full weight of the current and caught her fingers between the wood and the jam before the wedge bit home. I heard it take them. Not a cry, a breath, pushed out through the teeth. The chalk held. The door stood open. The dead end did not form. I had her wrist before I knew I'd reached for it. Her fingers sat wrong against the painted oak, 2 of them folded where no joint folds. "Mira, it's open." She pulled the hand to her chest and clamped it in the other, and her face had gone the color of the cold tubs. "Count still moving. Don't you stop it on me." "Sit. Press it here. I can chalk left-handed." She was already up, swaying, reading the line the way I'd taught her to read it. 8 doors open, the 9th, and 1 more past the turn. 10 to go. Go count them with Bram. Let me finish my marks. I let go of her wrist. It cost me more than the chisel had. The south face drew harder. Above us, the choke arch sat slack and empty, fed nothing, while the stone we'd named pulled the whole house's weight toward itself, toward the corner where a man read each course by touch, and would, any breath now, feel his own trap close under his fingers. I went to the floor where a man was needed. A step gave that I had not named, not the corbel, a tread, low on the dead stairs twin, the flight by the drying floor where Cale held his post. The building had found a second mouth. I felt it through my boots before the overlay caught up, the draw splitting, a thread peeling off my clean south line, going where I had drawn nothing. The blueprint rewrote itself on the wall. Banked coal ran a new vein, course climbing into course, a fault I had never certified glowing up the masonry to the drying floor hatch, and the current behind it leaned on the hatch door to shut it. 1 shut door. A dead end. The dead end fills. Cale was already against it. He had the bar in both hands and the door coming at him with the whole improvised draw at its back, and he set his shoulder to the painted oak and pushed into a thing that does not tire. I knew that door. Not this one, the one beneath it. Building 1248, the fire door on the second landing. The steel filing cabinet someone had wheeled square across it so the leaf could not swing, and the children streaming the wrong way past it into the dark, while I stood on the far side with my palm flat to a panel that would not give. Every night since, I'd held that door shut in my sleep, and lost. Here it stood open. A boy I'd known 3 weeks held it open with his body, paying down a debt that had never been his to carry. "Cale, off it. It'll take you under." "It's on the chart." His teeth were set. "You said hold what's open. I'm holding." The leaf walked him back a hand's width. His heels skidded in the malt dust. The draw doubled at the new fault, and the door came with it, and he dropped his hip and drove and got the bar across the jam, and the worn iron seated in the strike, and caught. The overlay flickered, redrew, steadied. The split thread folded back into the main line, because the door stayed open, because the dead end did not form, because 2 hands had done what no line of mine could draw. The current found its single drain again and ran south, off the dormitory leaves, off Liesel's brow, into the starved corner where a man read his own trap closing under his fingers. Low in the stone, the dead went from many voices to one. Cale's palms were skinned where the bar had bitten, a dark, wet sheen across both, and he did not look at them. He kept his eyes on the open dark past the hatch, on the Count moving through it. Bram's tally walking out under his arm. The leaf shoved at him once more, and lost. "Holding," he said, and leaned his weight into the bar, and held it. "Don't pull me out," Liesel said. She stood flat to the dressed bed. The coarse valen had cut smooth for her. The swallow scored in the stone above her head to draw it true. The gray sigil on her brow had woken. It drank the banked coal light off the wall and gave back nothing, a thumbprint of dark pressed into a child's forehead. I read the overlay, and the overlay read her. The draw wasn't hunting the stone. It came down the south face and turned at the last, not to the bed but to the mark, bending toward her brow the way standing water finds the one cracked tile. The ritual had never cared for masonry. It read the keeper's hand, and the keeper's hand had written its hunger into her skin years back, so the wall trusted the mark before it trusted the rock. She was the key. Every weight I'd moved tonight ran to where one small gray sigil aimed it. I had her sleeve in my fist before I'd thought it. 40 years of the same reflex. Get the body past the cabinet, through the leaf, out into air where the Count comes back whole. My arm was already taking her off the wall. "Come off this stone and it reads the next one down the row," she said. "Edda's cousin, then the one after." My hand stopped on her sleeve. Here was the whole shape of it, turned inside out. The danger was the one place she had to stay. Drag her clear, and the key went with her, and the draw would simply choose again. Fresh skin, a brow with no plan behind it. The only safe corner in the house was the one I'd spent 2 lives hauling children out of. I made myself open my fingers. Pell. He knelt at the foot of the bed, registry spread, his own forearm laid beside the page with the front half of the survey inked down it in lamp black. He didn't look up. He checked his arm against the book. Then he wrote the lie we'd built into the rector's own ledger, in the slant of the rector's own hand. Liesel struck from the south bed, the anchor set instead against the swallow Valen had cut with his chisel. The stone renamed the hungriest mouth in the house. The sigil on her brow flared, once, white at its edges. The forged page did its work. The key still burned on her skin, but it pointed now a yard to the left of the girl, off her flesh, onto the dressed stone the keeper's hand had tended. I felt it through my boots, the whole south weight unhooking from her brow and seating into the corbel bed, into the corner where Valen stood with his palm on his own work. The overlay locked. One drain. Liesel, on her stone, untouched, the mark eating light while the wall believed it. "Hold there," I said.
Don't move your feet." "I won't." Her chin was level. Her hands lay flat to the cold stone behind her, and she did not reach for mine. I stepped back and left her standing in the fire I'd spent 40 years pulling people out of. Valen turned from the bed and faced me across the foundation floor. No spells stood between us. 2 plans laid over the same stone, mine forged, his true, and the floor could only carry one. He knelt at his foundation stone and set his palm flat to the course, reading it. His fingers walked the seam the way they had the first night, naming each layer by the cold under his hand, and I watched the instant his thumb stopped where Pell's ink had renamed the cut. "Crude," he said. "A boy's forgery. The stone knows my hand from a copy of it. Does it?" He pressed both palms down and began to read it back, telling the foundation the truth beneath the lie, that the hungriest mouth was the south bed and not his corner. The drain in his corner dimmed a shade. He was unwriting it by touch, course by course, faster than I could chalk a counter. I left the chalk in my pocket. The work was finished. It only had to hold.
The wall had never read truth. It read the keeper's hand, and the keeper's hand on Pell's page said his corner was hungriest, and the stone owned no way to tell a true mark from a tended one, because he had spent 11 years teaching it to trust the hand and never the rock. The dead heard the change first. Along the south face, the single voice spread back into many, and the many moved. Not toward the bed. They ran the mortar joint course by course toward the corner where he knelt, the way water finds the low drain in a flooded floor. Valen felt them coming. His shoulders set, and he read faster, lips moving, naming the courses home to the bed. And every name he laid down, the page overruled, because the page carried the keeper's word, and he was only the keeper's hands. "Move the girl," he said. "An engineer's last offer, not a threat. Pull her clear, and the draw breaks loose. It chooses again, you know it does. It already chose. You taught it where to look." The gray sigil on Liesel's brow guttered low, the light running off it toward his corner. The overlay swung. The south weight came off the bed and seated into the corbel under his knees, and I felt it climb through my boots, the load finding its path at last. He stopped reading. He looked at his own hands on the stone, at the seam his thumb still held, and I watched him run the math I'd run in a stairwell 40 years back, the math of a load that has found its drain and will not be talked off it. "A foundation is owed its weight," he said. "You wrote that." The dead reached his corner. "I'll set down what I saw, because it was structure and not magic." The mortar went blood dark around the corbel bed first, the dark spreading up from the joint into the stone beneath him, and the course took his weight and asked for more. His palm did not lift. I think by then it could not. He had built the room to need a body. The room had found the one hand it trusted. The architect went down into the foundation he'd cut smooth for a girl. The swallow scored above doing its honest work, drawing it true, and he made no sound at all. The overlay locked. One drain. The south face quieted as the weight settled where the ledger now said it must. Liesel stood on her stone, the mark eating no more light, untouched. She stepped off it on her own. I caught her hand as she came down, and the wall that had demanded her let her cross the floor, and the load behind us ran true into the corner where the man who taught it hunger had signed for it himself. The corbel bed cracked from the inside. It was not a fall. It was a folding. The south weight, the brow load, the whole tonnage I'd spent the night moving, all of it seating now into one course, and that course dropping a finger's width to take it. Mortar dust sifted from the joints in straight gray lines. I pulled Liesel 2 steps toward the service hatch and felt the floor cant by a degree it had no right to. "Don't look back at it," I told her. She looked back at it. Valen knelt in the low corner with his palms still flat to the stone.
The course beneath him had gone down. His knees were below the floor line, the foundation closing on him by inches, the smooth seam he'd dressed for a girl drinking him in her place. He wasn't fighting it. A man who reads load knows when a load has chosen. "Step off," I said. I don't know why. The hatch was 4 strides behind me. The floor was going. There was nothing left to win. "Pull your hands up. Roll clear. 2 seconds before the corporal seats." "1," he said. His voice held level. Dust had grayed his beard and his lashes, and he blinked it away and looked at his own hands the way I'd looked at mine in a stairwell 40 years gone, the night I learned a building keeps its own books and settles them in whoever stands on the drain. The stone took his wrists.
The course closed over the backs of his hands without hurry, the way mortar takes a brick you've set true. No struggle in it, only fit. "You read the building better," he said. "Not bitter. An engineer crediting an engineer." "You read the people," I said. "I only read the rock." The corner of his mouth moved and gave it up. The foundation came up to his collar. Behind us, the south face quieted by degrees, each course reporting home, the dead settling into the joints they'd run all night to reach, the draw closing like a ledger squared at the foot of a long column. I got Liesel to the hatch. I laid my hand on the iron and felt for the heat that means a frame's gone out of true. And it was cold, plain cold, a door that would still open. When I looked back, the corner was floor again, flat. The swallow scored above the bed kept its wings spread over the smooth course, and where the architect had knelt, there was no seam left to find, only the building, fed, holding its weight at last on the one hand it had ever trusted. The hatch sat in its frame and stayed shut. That was the first thing I let myself trust. I'd waited all night for the building to speak through the iron, and now it kept its mouth closed and said nothing. And I put my back against the cold of it and went down to the floor. The safe room held the ones who made it. 8, along the north wall where I'd called the span truest 3 days back. Old Peter had his crushed hand bound in a sleeve somebody had torn for him. The Hauser girl took her breath in short grabs around a cracked rib, but took it. A man whose name I never got lay with his eyes open, reading the ceiling the way I read things, taking his comfort where the comfort was. Liesel leaned into my arm. No mark on her brow now, just skin, smudged gray, and a scab starting at the hairline where the wall had grazed her on the way down. Not all of us came in here. I made myself run the count, because a count was the one honest thing I had left to hand them. Brune, who'd held the 3rd door so the rest could clear it, the 2 Achterberg boys, the cook, Mart, who went back for a child that was already out. I set each name where it belonged and did not round any of them off. Then I noticed the noise was thinning. For 400 years, the dead in this place had never once stopped talking. Not words my ears caught, a pressure under the reading, a murmur worked into the joints, every soul the building had taken still calling the route it went down, still naming the drain it fell to. I'd done the whole night's work inside that sound. You stop hearing a mill that runs past your window long enough, I'd stopped hearing them. Now one dropped out of the joint, then another. Each voice fell quiet as the building wrote it home, the ledger it had spent 4 centuries balancing, finally finding the line for it. The murmur sank to a hum. The hum drew down to a single thread, low under the granite, the oldest of them. The first man laid under the first course, and the thread pulled tight and let go. 412 years. The building had nothing more to say. I sat in it. I had never heard the place this quiet. I had not known stone could hold a quiet like this, with no draw in it, no weight asking after a body, no name running for the corner. The load stood where the law now said it must, and the law was satisfied. And a satisfied building is the most silent thing there is. My hands were still flat on the floor from reading. I turned them over. Mortar had dried in the creases,
the same straight gray lines that had sifted from the joints all night, and I looked at the lines and let the names come up through them, one at a time, and stay as long as they wanted. Liesel's head went heavy against my shoulder, asleep, finally, the way only the young can drop into it.
I didn't move, in case I woke her, and in case moving started something I couldn't stop. The granite over us settled the last hair of its weight and held. And in the safe room there was the sound of 8 people breathing, and the wind finding the seam of the hatch, and under all of it, nothing. No voices, none, for the first time since the first stone was set. I was reseating a grate over the east drain, tapping the bar down with the flat of a maul until the iron sat flush in its channel. It ran water now, only water, rain off the upper court, finding the low point and going out under the wall the way water is supposed to go. Behind me, 2 of the condemned boys walked a door in on its edge, the chapel leaf, the one whose hinges I'd reversed before noon. Tam took the top corner. We'd pulled every door in the lower halls off its pins and rehung it to swing toward the court, toward open air, so that a man leaning his weight on it in the dark would put it open and not haul it shut against his own back. I checked the swing. It opened outward, easy, no bind. The town came down the stair by midday, not the way they used to come, to count us and mark the failures off a list. They came carrying. The steward, Aldous, who once stepped wide of the condemned bench so his coat wouldn't brush us, set a barrow of bread inside the door and stood there. When I looked up from the hinge, he didn't look past me. He looked at me. He held it. "You hung them backward," he said. "They open the right way now. Push, and you're out." He nodded slow, like a man turning a drawing he'd been handed upside down his whole life. Galvert had a crew, and the crew was us, the ones the building had been raised to swallow, turned loose in it with mauls and pins and a length of good oak. Nobody signed it over. There was no one left to sign. Peter counted doors with his good hand and called each one sound or not. The Hauser girl, careful of the cracked rib, chalked the lintels that wanted shoring. We worked the place the way you work a thing you mean to keep. By dusk, we reached the gate passage, where the ceiling sagged a finger over the only wide way out, and that one I would not leave to luck. Liesel held the post plumb while I set the beam. Fresh oak, dressed square, long enough to carry the span and still let 2 go under it abreast. "Higher, your end," she lifted. Steady. The scab at her hairline had gone dark and tight, and she didn't favor it. We brought the beam up into the notch together, her shoulder under one end, mine under the other, and I felt the load come down onto the wood and stop where the grain said it could stop. "Hold it. I've got it." The span took the weight and kept it, a beam set across the way out, framing the first door this place had ever owned that was meant to let a body leave. She blew the hair off her face and looked at me sideways, both arms still locked under her end. "Steady, brother," she said, and she meant the word.